Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our graduation seminar for ARC 402B Spring 2023 at Uzagid University. Today, we're going to host Sercan Sağlam from Poitiers, France. Since the sign assignment is Galata Museum, we believe that it is very interesting to have some insight on what kind of collection could be displayed within such a museum, the Museum of Galata. Sercan Sağlam has been conducting extensive research on Galata and on the stones belonging to the Galata area, and that's the reason why we have invited him. Özge Özguvenci, who is PhD candidate and research assistant at the Department of Architecture and Design of Uzagid University, is going to introduce Sercan Sağlam. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sercan Sağlam completed his bachelor's on urban and regional planning in Istanbul Technical University. He completed his master's on conservation and regeneration in the University of Sheffield. He did his PhD on preservation of the architectural heritage in Politecnico di Milano in 2018. He has been a member of the scientific board of Adramitean Archaeological Field Studies, Surveys, and Excavations since 2017. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Kadir Has University Istanbul Studies Center and worked as a part-time lecturer at Medipol University Faculty of Fine Arts and Fine Arts Design and Architecture. His research interests are urban history, architectural heritage, and urban archaeology. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So can you see my screen? Is it working?
Yes, it's okay.
Perfect. Today I'll talk about some new research for future design concerning Pera's Genoese lapidary inventory. As a part of the European Research Council Graph East project, where I'm currently working for. And when we talk about the Pera in Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, it's on the other side, the Golden Horn from the historical peninsula part of the city, and was renowned as a Genoese colony during the late Middle Ages, as a part of the Genoese trade network all along the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, and currently a part of the Beyoğlu district, modern Istanbul. And this Genoese colony appeared as an indirect result of the Fourth Crusade, where the Latin Empire was founded in the occupied Byzantine territories, and the alliance the Republic of Genoa and the successor Byzantine state Empire of Nicaea did in order to reconquest Constantinople and reestablish the Byzantine Empire. So Treaty of Nymphaeum dated 1261 was a kind of the main reason how the Genoese found themselves once again in the capital of the Byzantine Empire, which its recapture happened in the same year, and first neighborhood established in the historical peninsula area, and because of some political circumstances, a couple of years later, it was moved across the Golden Horn to today's Galata. And the Genoese colony established there in 1267 was named Pera officially by the Genoese. And during the early years, we find some archival registries about the social life, the urban fabric, and the commerce carried out in Pera with many merchants and some churches like San Michele, Aya Irene, from the Byzantine period. However, soon those churches and the urban fabric will be replaced by the Genoese function, which I'm gonna talk about in short before focusing on the lapidary inventory. And even though the neighborhood was established in 1267, its first delimitation happened in May 1303, only in May 1303. And according to this edict issued by the Byzantine Emperor Andronikos II, it started in the west next to the dockyards where Halit shipyards are connected, climbed north, reached some certain vineyards, and leaving some like churches as reference points, as landmarks out of this area. And in the east, with a very characteristic zigzag movement, it reached the shores of the Bosphorus once again before the castle of Galata. So this was the first neighborhood and its precise boundaries in Galata, where with many metric details and reference monuments. However, there were some problems to apply these precise borders to the current urban fabric of Galata. But if we just focus on that like zigzag movement that I mentioned in the eastern part, and the former Franciscan convent in Galata, established around 13th, 14th centuries, and was like one of the religious landmarks of the colony during the Genoese period. And once it was replaced by the Yeni Mosque in the late 17th century, you'll see an upside down L-shaped plot where the Yeni Mosque was located, since it was also demolished as well. And the area is now a bazaar in busy commercial network of Galata itself. And we have exact plans of that Franciscan convent before the fire in the late 17th century, where we again see that upside down L-shaped plot with the churches of San Francesco, as it was the Franciscan convent, and Santa Anna for the ladies, since the monastery was for both nuns and priests. And considering like many details about the architecture of this convent and the situation after the fire, since it was replaced by the Yeni Mosque. And considering all these sequence chronologically, we'll see that upside down L-shaped plot and these two churches of Santa Anna and San Francesco, which helps us to locate that zigzag movement where the predecessor, i.e. Anargyroi and Ios Nikolaos, were located. So it appears that during the Genoese period, some churches were established, but they were not built from scratch in this like monumental occasions, but they replaced the already existing Byzantine churches in the area. And these applies also for the other monuments as well. It just helps us to understand the precise borders of the colony so that we can put borderline of May 1303 in the imperial edict with a precision in the urban fabric today. So, however, it did not stop with this edict alone, and the neighborhood was extended towards the north in only March 1304. And even though it was strictly forbidden to build like any kind of fortifications by the Byzantine emperor who like ruled the territory naturally, but the Genoese colonists built a kind of like strong houses or like tower houses to protect themselves all along their neighborhood, and also occupied the churches previously outside their area in the beginning, but all these extensions, updates resulted with the more occupation in the territory and surrounding Byzantine churches, so that the area was complete to a rectangle surrounded with a moat, and those strong houses or tower houses appeared, and then linked with walls, as testified by the architectural evidence, where you can see numbers 1, 2, and 3 from this first phase of fortifications in Galata. And they're still existing, so many of them are remaining in your project area, so pay attention to them. And they're trapped in the modern fabric, hard to access, hard to see, but they're there, so they're like archaeological, the palimpsest of Galata until the modern age, and including like defensive towers, the walls attached to those towers, like to form a proper defense line, all trapped between buildings from the Ottoman and the Republican periods, from inside and also outside, so they trapped in between. However, there are like walls and towers easier to access, for example, in the Azapkapı area where the current Haliç Metro Bridge is positioned and currently restored, by the way. The tower is in a better condition, and also the walls with casemates are easier to see how that first fortifications of Pera look like. And meanwhile, the Genoese started to put some slabs to commemorate their constructions and also to honor the Byzantine Empire, like with some political motivation to keep a balance and also to represent themselves to the locals, since it was like a trade hub, perhaps to other merchants, and it was the visual identity of the Genoese through these slabs. So here the lapidary story begins. And I'll first talk about, like, try to follow this sequence for the mural inscriptions, which were for the defensive works, such as this one, where the Byzantine Empire was commemorated in the center, being the ruler, where the Genoese had this as a grant in the Byzantine territory. Therefore, the flag of the Republic of Genoa appears next to the central Byzantine coats of arms belonging to the imperial Paleologoi family. And of course, the concessions continued in 1316 after a devastating fire. Once again, the neighborhood was extended towards the north, and including many reconstructions, primarily the communal palace, Palazzo Comunale. And this long inscription about the concession was so famous, it appeared in the chronicles of many later travelers from England, from France. And this concession officially allowed the Genoese to build their communal palace towards the hill, where you can see how it looked like by the 19th century, when it was called Berekethan. It's still located towards the Galata Tower between the Bankalar Street and Kartchnar Street. However, when the street was expanded for the new tramway line, the front facade of this Genoese palace was demolished, and the building looks as if like a monument from the 19th century in the front facade, because this part was rebuilt. However, we can find traces of its original architecture in the rear facade, despite 19th century modifications. However, we can still like reconstruct its original architecture with the help of old panoramas and engravings. And this stripe towards the north, where the communal palace is located, was the concession of 1316 towards the hill beyond the moat and out of the first area of 1303 and 04. And the northern fortifications started in 1335, as you can see, not only the historical accounts from that time, like such as the Byzantine historians Georgios Pachymeris, Nikephoros Gregoras, and the contemporary emperor of that time, John VI Cantacuzénos, and the lapidary evidence. 1335 was the inscription seen on the slab towards the hill, just out of the first territory of the Genoese towards the coast. It was placed on a tower, and then on the last tower dedicated to Saint Nicholas, for example, there was another slab dated 1349. So it shows the fortification process of the triangular area towards the hilltop, and including the Galata Tower itself. And we find the exact story of the construction of the Galata Tower as a defensive measure to protect the colony from the siege coming from the land side, from the contemporary emperor. Like, because of some political conflicts between the Byzantines and the Genoese, they were not always friends in the same area, so they had conflicts as well. And John VI Cantacuzénos talks about and gives precise details about the construction of the Galata Tower in the late 1348. So corresponding to the last slab mentioning 1349 for defensive measure towards the hilltop. And this is how the situation was by the end of the mid-14th century, when the Galata Tower was built on the hilltop. And from this phase, in addition to the Galata Tower, we have these two defensive towers with a horseshoe plan towards the hill, reaching the Galata Tower from the west facade, as you can see here with number 4. And of course, the Galata Tower itself, which had many restorations, alterations, modifications throughout its long life. And the current monument is remained from the Genoese until the 4th floor, roughly 25 meters of the Galata Tower is from the Genoese period, as it's like masonry and architecture and also interior details show us. So it's not like, even though it's like the unmistakably the symbol of Galata and mostly visible from its upper parts, which are all Ottoman works. So the main Genoese section are in a much lower parts. So it's just a funny paradox. And in 1352, with another concession, the neighborhood of the Genoese were extended once again, but this time towards the east until the Galata Castle. Perhaps you remember from the Edict of May 1303, it was a landmark for the eastern borders, away from the first Genoese quarter. But now they extended until to it. Meanwhile, also in the east were two Byzantine neighborhoods located, Pegai, which will become the Genoese Spiga, current Azapkatı Kasımpaşa area, and Argyropolis, like Lagirio during the Genoese period, which is Tophane, Karaköy Tophane area in the east. So now the lateral suburbs began to appear. And when the Genoese occupied this Byzantine castle, which secured the northern end of the chain that protected the entrance of the Golden Horn, in 1391, according to archival evidence, they built a tower next to it. They strengthened the castle for their colonies. And once again, according to the lapidary evidence, the fortifications of Lagirio started in 1350s and continued in 1404, as testified by slabs you can see here. And mainly the famous panorama of Constantinople by Cristoforo Buondelmonti and its different versions in archives. We can see an inaccurate, like from an architectural point of view, slightly inaccurate depiction of Pera and Constantinople from like a architectural precision, but it still shows the Galata Tower itself, the division of the suburb, like the castle with like a disoriented tower. It should have been next to the coast, but the tower was placed right behind it, since we can confirm the following panoramas from the Ottoman period, starting from Lapidary, continued by Matrak Cenahus, and it's possible to find many visual evidence about Galata in this case. And this was the eastern expansion towards the north, where there is like a morphological change also in the urban fabric, and the walls will shift from that expansion point as well. So it's important to read the urban fabric in the meantime, accompanied by historical sources, lapidary evidence, all together as an interdisciplinary point of view, so that we can more or less accurately put the expansion of May 1352. And the main parts remained from the space were like the tower now in the garden of Lycée de Saint-Benoît, and the castle itself with like many reused building materials, currently Yeraltı underground mosque next to the coast and just before the ferry pier in Karaköy. As you can see here with numbers 5, the tower in Saint-Benoît, and the castle and some attached walls with number 8. And with a final concession dated 1376, the whole Argyropolis, the former Argyropolis, which will become the Lagirio suburb of the Genoese Pera colony, like, was given to the Genoese. And with further lapidary evidence starting from 1380s, as you can see, this area was further fortified, and also Spiga in the west, in Azapkapı, Kasımpaşa area around the Haliç shipyards, from the hilltop and also from the coast, with 2 series of walls, started to surround them gradually. And we can follow these construction phases from the years appear on these slabs. For instance, you can see with the depiction of Archangel Michael placed on a tower dated 1387 from the period of Podesta, the governor, the Genoese governor of the colony, Podesta Raffaele Doria, and another one dated 1397, again from the same area. So we see how the area was gradually surrounded, first with moats as a defensive measure, and some preliminary wooden structures, as Cantacuzénos talks about, when the Genoese were unable to find enough materials to build walls and towers properly. They just quickly surrounded the area with moats, erected some stakes, like some wooden constructions, and then replaced them gradually with proper stone fortifications. That's why it appeared step by step, because of materials shortage. And that's why it had many phases, all the way until the Ottoman conquest in 1453. So these are the walls around the Harip Gate area, next to the Haliç Metro Bridge. This part was also currently restored by the Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. Take a look if you wish so. And we can see the sequence of the eastern and western fortifications starting from 1418, during the time of Podesta Tidicio Doria, as a slab shows us, and also until the 1430s, all along the coastline of the Tophane area, next to the shore of the Bosphorus. You can see here on the right-hand side, the coastline walls appeared, and also the Azapkapı walls in the vicinity of the Sokullu Mehmet Pasha Mosque and Haliç shipyards, trapped in some modern roads and passes, and the shipyard itself, and also in the courtyard of the mosque. Some fragmentary Genoese walls remained, shown here with numbers 7 in the west. And we see when they were built from 2 mural slabs dated 1435, from the time of Podesta Stefano de Marini. And meanwhile, also the landward and the corner fortifications were continued until the very end, especially during 1440s by Podesta Niccolo Antonio Spinola and Boruele Grimaldi, where we see all these names of the governors of Pera, the construction years, and what kind of work it was mentioned in the inscription, like a wall, like a tower. It's been mentioned very clearly and represented with the coat of arms. The Republic of Genoa is in the center, which represents the country. And on the one hand side, there is the coat of arms of the Duke in Genoa, and the other coat of arms belonged to the governor who ruled the Pera colony. So it was the visual legacy from like a heraldic point of view and also an epigraphic point of view, and architectural as well, since they were positioned on walls and towers. And the works continued until the mid-1440s by Baldassare Maruffo. As we see you can see the coat of arms are changing, and we see how they looked like on the towers, for instance, on this old photograph from the late 19th century, we have many like destructions starting from 1864. That's why few fragments remained. And most of these mural inscriptions were moved to the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, which I'll talk about in detail very soon. And that's why we rely on these old photographs or panoramas or the archaeological evidence to see how the situation was, because they are not on those walls and towers anymore, taken and moved elsewhere. And these were so important. Also, the chronicles of that time, the late Genoese period until the Ottoman conquest, do also mention these inscriptions. For instance, Kyriakos of Ancona himself wrote one of the inscriptions of those slabs, a famous humanist of the Renaissance, and the slab is now in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. So he proposed one of the inscriptions, for instance, to Podesta Baldassare Marufo, and they have such interesting stories. I mean, how they appeared, how they found themselves on the walls, and then in a museum storage. And these are the last ones after Lucino de Fazio, dated 1447, and the Benedetto Vivaldi of 1448, and the final Podesta, Angelo Giovanni Lomellini, which I used also for the poster. And it marked the end of the defensive phase in 1452 before the Ottoman conquest a year later. And that's why we see how the colony expanded, how it's been fortified. And now you know where those years are coming from. They're all coming from, like few of them are coming from some precise mentions, such as the memoir of John VI, Cantacuzenus, about the construction of the Galata Tower. So that's a historical reference, 1348. But the majority of the years are coming from those lapidary evidence with like inscriptions, coat of arms, ones on the towers. Only two of them are in situ in the place right now, on the Azap Kapı part, which is under restoration nowadays, and on the Harip Gate, as I mentioned, next to the Haliç Metro Bridge. You can see, if you want, so how they looked like, but only two remained out of 45 in total. So now you know where these years are coming from. And this is the last part of the remained fortifications from the Genoese period, a ruined tower next to the Tophane, and the walls that attached next to the Galata Tower against landward siege. A semicircular wall now surrounds the square in front of the Galata Tower. And here numbers 9 and 10 being the last survived parts of once mighty and unconquerable Genoese walls of Pera, Galata. And even from the urban fabric, the urban morphology by the mid-19th century here, redrawn after the plan of Gaetan de Ostoia in his Beyoğlu Galata plan, you see the morphology is more grid and rather regular in the core area, but the suburbs had slightly irregular organic urban pattern and delimited by the walls. And even though the walls no longer exist today, when you look at some aerial views of Galata, you will see traces of the Galata walls. Even though they are no longer there, it still shaped the urban morphology of the area. And it's still come up with some minor like architectural discoveries, such as this Genoese hall, once forgotten, but then reappeared once the modern attachments were removed. So the area has a very rich archaeology where those like lapidary inventory is a part of, but also from an architectural point of view, like just pay attention if you will go again and try to see these traces of the Genoese. So for the mural slabs, the main sources are coming from Luigi Tommaso Belgrano and Ettore Rossi, but they actually complete each other. some of them have only text, some of them have like only photographs, so it's hard to put them all together. So you can use my PhD thesis. It's annex part for the mural inscriptions you can find in academia, and you will find all the list and accompanied by like a plan where they were discovered, photograph, their measurements, which will help you to design your Galata Museum, and information to who it belonged to, etc. So I tried to put all these information together, like kind of one page for each slab in my PhD thesis. So it will be helpful. But of course, Belgrano and Rossi were the primary sources which compiled these slabs coming from the walls and towers. And there are also tombstones, like funerary slabs of the former Genoese colony, and they were primarily coming from the Arab mosque, still functioning in the busy Galata, and formerly San Paolo, San Domenico of the Dominican convent, like the Franciscan convent, like the monastery in the Pera colony. And this was the Dominican monastery in the Pera colony, and built in the first quarter of the 14th century, and had like many architectural changes, then converted into a mosque after the Ottoman conquest. We can follow San Francesco and San Domenico on the panoramas, engravings, photographs all along until the modern times. They were like two major churches of the colony, in addition to the cathedral San Michele, once on the plot of Rüstem Pasha Caravanserai, or like Kurşunlu Han. So these three buildings were the major churches of the Pera Genoese colony, but most of the funerary slabs are coming from the Arab mosque. And during the Ottoman period, it had many repairs because of destructive fires happened in Galata neighborhood. And of course, it was burned down several times. It's been extended, repaired, renewed, both the exterior and the interior. You can see the belfry was converted into a minaret. And you see it used to be like a narrow church with 3 aisles, and then it was expanded towards the north. You can see the Gothic arches and then a slight expansion towards the north or the left-hand side in the section. And these joints of different masonry types, which are very characteristic, with like brick dimensions, the stone, the sequence of stone and brick courses. So we can find out the original part from the Genoese period, marked different shades of gray on the plan, and the Ottoman editions. And also during the Ottoman period, the building had many changes as well. So it's the long life of the monuments, the fortifications, and also the religious monuments as well. And the Ottomans widely reused the Genoese parts of remained from the former San Domenico, recut them, reworked them, and used on their own repairs and additions. And especially during the Saliha Sultan restorations of 1734-35, after the fire of 1731, which devastated almost the entire Galata area from Azap Kapı until Tophane, and also the Arab mosque burnt down. That caused the major, perhaps the biggest work, where the inner space was expanded towards the north, the collapsed Genoese parts, including the tombstones and the Gothic portals, were recut and reused. That was caused the biggest change on the building. And not only these fragments or the architecture of the building itself, which is obviously from the 14th century, as the masonry characteristics the architecture shows, but there are also some frescoes in the building, currently covered with some panels and are inaccessible, but they appeared especially after the earthquake of 99. And further frescoes are expected in the mosque. So it's like very eclectic in this case, coming from the Genoese period on like a former Byzantine church, Aya Irene, and then like San Domenico, and then the Arab mosque. And it's possible to find architectural and art historical traces of all these periods in the building. So I suggest you to visit it if you have time. And of course, the tombstones, Le Pietre Sepolcrali di Arabciani, were first published by Dalleggio d'Alessio, because more than 100 tombstones belonged to the Genoese residents of the Pera colony were discovered during the last restoration works, like last comprehensive restoration works during the First World War, when they removed the carpets and mats and wooden floorings inside the mosque, which I will show you here. On this photograph, during the First World War, when they removed the carpets and wooden planks on the floor, these tombstones appeared. And they are like more than 100, and they belonged to the Genoese residents, represented their like families, they're like tombstones, but they covered the floor, as is the tradition in churches, maybe you've seen already. And then almost all of them were taken and then put in the storage of the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, where they are kept today. And as I said, they were first published by Dalleggio d'Alessio in that book I mentioned, dated in 1942, but he made some dating mistakes. So it's like the primary source, but not the only source. So some dates were like misread, such as in this occasion. So even though it's obviously like 1360, on the tombstone, he made a mistake, dated a century later, a century before. And they were like corrected by some following articles. So during a field mission, like very recent field mission, previous month, as a part of the ERC Graphist project, once again, I was able to access the storage of the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, since very few of them were on display previously. So thanks to the official permission of the Istanbul Archaeological Museums, I've been allowed to access the storages in person of the museums. So there are like several gardens and storages not accessible to the visitors. And also the exhibition hall, once the Genoese lapidary stuff on display, is inaccessible because of the restoration, let's say demolition of that part because of the earthquake risk. And even though like these lapidary inventory, not only the defensive one, but also the funerary ones were mentioned in several sources, the last comprehensive work was the one of Dalleggio d'Alessio, and some couple of articles, mainly by Sigrid Dull, and also some associates centered around like Sigrid Dull. There were some important corrections, but the later scholars primarily focused on like new funerary inscriptions. So Dalleggio d'Alessio published like more than 100, and other scholars just briefly addressed that source, which you can find online. Let it be your second important source, if you wish so, for your Galata Museum design, to see how they look like. It's online, and it will be important for the funerary slabs of Galata. But even though there were some obvious mistakes or obvious some problems of the collection published by Dalleggio d'Alessio, later scholars considered like new slabs or new inscriptions to be the one to publish the first, more or less. So that's why the project was important for me, the field mission, to take a look again. And it appeared that Dalleggio d'Alessio mostly focused on the old photographs in the museum inventory list in the office. So he probably did not see all the slabs by himself and just published the ones already legible in on those like black and white photographs, obviously. So when I saw the slab in the storage or like in the old black and white photograph of the museum inventory, it's already legible. And the ones which are not legible, for instance, in this case, D'Alessio simply considered the photographs without even seeing the artifact by himself. So in this occasion, for instance, even though like the two sides of this slab were used, like it's like a reused slab, it's a double-sided slab. For instance, he published as if like two different slabs like, positioned elsewhere. But it's nonsense. So it actually belonged to the different sides of the same slab, coming from the late 14th century and like 1424, as the coat of arms, the inscription tells us. And if you focus on to the damage on the slab, for example, the old surface was damaged and the hole opened there, probably for a beam at right angles during the Ottoman period. So it's very funny. And if you focus on the surface of 1424, the upper image, it's in better condition. So that's the part which looked upwards by the Ottoman conquest. So the reverse was upside down, like, and then used again. And during the Ottoman period, it was like taken away, once again turned, and then damaged. The cross was removed because it concerned the Muslim prayers, and the inscription was erased, and it was architecturally reused with like a cut edge. You can see it gave slight damage to the left-hand side of the upper image. So the slabs also had a long life. And an interesting detail, on the upper image, you see the inscription continues as like 3 lines, but some certain space was left for next burials from the same family. So that blank space is not coincidence. So there were some people buried already, but a space left blank for next burials, but it did not happen. So there was an intention of a longer usage of the original artifact, which did not happen. And it was already like a reused material, but the Ottomans reused it, put upside down here. So think about it. When you will design your museum, for example, the slabs not have like a single surface used, but the double. And it will be important to have their dimensions, as mentioned in D'Alessio, how they looked like. They are roughly, like approximately 250 kilograms, approximately, but not less, like certainly more than 200 average. And keep in mind, like their dimensions, weight, the usage, and it's gonna be an inspiration. And also another example, the surfaces of the tombstone was reused from 1357 and from 1407, and it was precisely cut. So it appears that in addition to the statements of D'Alessio, where the tombstones were removed from the floor of the Arab mosque during the First World War, they were not all intact. They were not in the position as they were in the Ottoman conquests. So it's apparent that the Ottomans recut them, reused them upside down, because the damaged surface here, as you can see, is the older one. So it's obviously, it looked previously that side, was looking upwards, and then once again turned and turned again during the Ottoman period. So it was a central chiseling. So it addresses only the central part, meaning that happened after this rework happened. And this is the phenomenon I already showed you. So the coat of arms here, you can see on the courtyard and on the walls, they are reused tombstones. So apparently after the Great Fire of the 18th century, the tombstones were like taken together with collapsed architectural parts, recut and reused by the Ottomans. And that's why they were like put upside down again, like turned backwards. So another double-sided slab. So you can see the dimensions are given precisely. So perhaps will be useful for your design, and you'll see how they look like. And another example, like a funerary slab was reworked almost a square, roughly 45 centimeters. And thanks to the field mission, for example, you see, it was possible to add more to what Taleggio D'Alessio said. And I was able to suggest new transcriptions, new critical editions and translations after the suggestions of Taleggio D'Alessio, since obviously he did not see all the stones by himself. And on the image on the right-hand side, for example, that's an intact one, still on the floor, without any damages. The cross is still there. The inscription is still intact. So the coat of arms, so that's an original, for example. That's an in situ one. It's just below the minaret, the belfry. And that could be the case, what the previous scholars mentioned for the removed ones from the floor when the carpets were like taken, etc. But we have many reused tombstones which show the long life of them. So why am I talking in this way? Because these damages created the necessity of special lighting and special display in order to see them better. Because many of them were ignored previously. And with the help of special light at right angles from the side, it's possible to return the inscriptions in full, previously omitted by Taleggio D'Alessio, other scholars. So perhaps this new Galata Museum and its like funerary lapidary inventory of these like damaged or defaced inscriptions will be an inspiration for you. There could be like a dark room with special lighting for these kind of inscriptions, and perhaps like a different room with the funerary slabs with inscriptions already legible without any damages, and like another room, another hall only for the defensive inscriptions, since they were all mixed and few of them were on display in the archaeological museum. And perhaps it's going to be a better opportunity to put all of them together. And what about the two-sided slabs, for example, one damaged, the other not? So how to display it in two different conditions? Let it be your inspiration or motivation. And again, thanks to these rereadings with the help of special light, as you can see here, for example, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. For example, an example here, Taleggio D'Alessio was unable to read almost nothing about them, just made some speculation, like this person could be that, this one, that one. Mentioned nothing, but still gave the precise dimensions, the inventory number, what it was. And a rereading in person, like by myself in storage, as a part of our graphist project, I was able to return the inscription in full. And it says like, here lies the discreet young man, Tommaso Carrega, of the Lord Raffaele, who died in 1448 on 11 October. On his soul, may the Lord have mercy. Full. And we know from archival evidence who this Raffaele Carrega, the father of the deceased Tommaso Carrega, was. A Genoese noble resident, participated in the defense of Pera against the Ottomans in 1453. So these were real people. They had life, they had their names in archival evidence, and they had tombstones, their relatives, now in the dark storages of the Istanbul archaeological museums, but not anymore. So your design and your new ideas will perhaps be an inspiration for it, and you'll have some different ideas to display them, since you see they're not having the same shape or same weight or same damage condition. So another one, like I'll give a couple of examples, like previously Taleggio d'Alessio was unable to read the inscription because the photograph was not enough. But if you see the slab on the site, it's like, even though it was damaged, it was clear to read. And it says, here lies the virtuous young man, Pietro Massa, who died on the 1st of November, 1440, during the time of respectable man, Lord Simone Massa, once his father, and at that time the honorable podesta of Pera, whose soul may rest in peace. Amen. So we have the tombstone of the son of the podesta, the governor of Pera, like quite important people. And we see also in the archival evidence, Simone Massa, mentioned as Maci here, coming from the mace, the hand weapon, mentioned several times. So it's possible to follow these stories from like a lapidary point of view, from an archival point of view. So think about it. So perhaps in the museum, a section could be only for the artifact itself, and perhaps another telling the story, what happened, or can be like a memory room. I don't know. I'm just providing you these ideas. Let it be the last one. I have like many new readings. And once again, like the reading of Taleggio d'Alessio was very like brief, almost nothing, but a reading on the site helped to read in full. The tomb of Giorgio Avogadro and his heirs, 1381, in which lies also his father. So this is how the concept works, like coat of arms, a cross, and names of what had happened. And this is an example how I worked, like light, and the previously illegible readings became legible. So perhaps it's going to be useful for you to understand the reality of these artifacts. And it's possible to follow these coat of arms in heraldic sources. And many examples more. I'm not talk and read all of them, but those three were just as examples, and perhaps going to be motivations for you to arrange your areas. Because in the museum, it was not the best one. Just it was like cherry picking a few mural slabs, a few tombstones with a very bad lighting, as if like a government office remained from 1960s. I mean, it wasn't the best place, and even not accessible anymore because of the earthquake risk. It was close to public display, and in restoration nowadays. However, if you would like to see some slabs on display, there is a new exhibition in the Galata Tower, and together with this archaeological findings, small findings, 3 slabs are on display in the Galata Tower, like one funerary inscription on the left-hand side and 2 mural slabs in the center and on the right-hand side. If you have opportunity, go and take a look, or maybe you've seen already, so how heavy or how thick they are, so how they look like, how it looks like. It's going to be an example for you, so what kind of material you are talking about. And most of them are, by the way, reused Byzantine artifacts, so they have like an even longer life. Byzantine double Genoese use, like an Ottoman reuse, damage, very rich composition. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, any comments, any accusations, anything, it's more than welcome. Thank you very much.
For your presentation, which has shown the importance of these slabs for the history of Galata, Beyoğlu, Pera, Karaköy, Argyropolis, whatever you want to call that area of the world, Justinianopolis, and you know, Tsikais and more. And I do believe that these slabs not only are, you know, just pieces of stone that could be displayed in a museum like they did in the Galata Tower, but there's much more to it, because they were, you know, they were conceived to be attached to the walls, to the city walls. City walls are gone, not mostly gone, but the slabs are still there. So in a way, and they're quite big also, so we're talking about big pieces, that they could, in my opinion, represent the core of the collection of a Galata museum, or a Galata museum could display photographs, paintings, maps, the chain, you know, the Bosphorus chain, sorry, the Golden Horn chain, and any other object that is related with the history of Galata. But these slabs not only could be collected all together in a big space, you know, in order to display them as they are, with different aspects to their, you know, complex history, but moreover, they could be in some way a fragmentary representation of the city walls themselves, therefore of the city, of the settlement of Galata as a whole. The city walls are the essence of the city, said Isidorus of Seville, and so we don't have the walls anymore. But just imagine in your museum design having a core collection, therefore a core space, just like in the museum of the Acropolis of Athens. The core collection is the frieze from the Parthenon, and that, you know, central space of the museum on the last floor was arranged around the collection of the stones belonging to the frieze of the Parthenon. So I'm just giving you some suggestions on how to conceive your museum, just not to be a box, you know, but something more than a box. Where in our recent published paper, which I'm going to give you the link later on, and please, Sercan, share with me whatever you want to be shared with the students so I can load it on the learning management system. In our just recently published paper, Digital Survey and Architectural Representation of a Genoese Tower for the Museum of the City and Territory of Galata, we were, you know, pushing this idea of establishing a museum of the city and the territory of Galata, where you could have a 3D model of the city. You know, you can have perhaps maybe even more than one showing the Hellenistic phase, one showing the early Byzantine, late Byzantine, Genoese, Ottoman, you know, big city models, perhaps. And that could also be another space, you know, where you have the city models. But then this collection of slabs, I think, is very interesting for the design concept itself. And perhaps you could have one or two renderings showing the interior of this, you know, museum we have conceived. And instead of putting Guernica by Picasso or the Nike statue that is somewhere else, or the Pegasus, sorry, the Pergamon frieze, you know, please try to put these slabs in your rendering, because you're displaying a collection of objects that is related to Galata. Anyone? Yes, anyone else?
Can I add something to integrate what you said and what also Sercan present very well as usual? If I may, the last two slides you show us about the so-called Genoese section in the Galata Tower. Please, I advise all the students to go and see the Museum of the Tower to exactly not do what they did. Because when you think all the things that Sercan told us today about the history of this settlement town, in walled town of Pera in Genoese time, actually you will not see almost anything in the museum. Mostly of the Museum of Galata inside the tower is instead dedicated only to the Ottoman phase and not to the Genoese, which was actually the base. Of course, there was also the previous Byzantine origins, but let's say the most consistent part was the Genoese, especially when we consider the defensive walls and the system of defensive walls. Moreover, the two slides that Sercan showed us also underline the shallowness of the people who are managing the museum, because instead of put proper information about those slabs, maybe you can show again, is written that they belongs to a royal family, quotes. I mean, Genoa was a republic. There were no royal families. So if you make such kind of mistake in the, if you show just the last one, I think it's very clear Sercan, your last slides of the slab inside the Galata, let's say, Tower Museum. Go to the last one, yes. Even below, the last, okay. Exactly, this one. You can read plate with royal seals, but actually, I don't think, and also on the other two slabs is written always, no? Hanedan in Turkey.
Yes, a very little addition. It says like 13th century and it reads like 1435. It's like 15th century.
Yeah,
like
but
obvious.
everything, it's such a shallowness. Also here, no, is written royal seal. Royal seal.
It's not coat of arms or like shelled or escoteon or blazon or like we have tons of names, but they name
like
seal.
if Genoa was part of a royal kind of kingdom, something like that. It means also it shows the superficiality of those people dealing with historical artifacts without knowing exactly the origin of the history. That's why the work of Sercan is very precious, because when you want to go and make an exhibition and exhibit something, you want to be sure of what you are going to exhibit. Please.
And these are not from Galata, by the way. It's irrelevant to Galata. These are just like
those are just collected randomly in Istanbul and belonging to Byzantine time or whatever. And in that room has no link at all with the rest of the. So please go and visit, and how not to make a museum. Let's say that is my suggestion for. Otherwise, I appreciate very much the last part of the work, which is the continuation of the studies of Sercan about what we found out in the archaeological museum. Because personally, I was there more than 10 years ago, maybe 12. But after that, they closed the doors. They didn't let anyone to go in the depot, because I checked personally all those labs back then, but in a very, in a short visit. And after that, it was not possible anymore for anyone. So I appreciate a lot the fact that now finally someone can dedicate his time and will to study more in details all these incredible and important artifacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any other comment or question from the audience? Okay, so having no other questions from the audience, we can stop the recording.